Okay, hello friends. So again, we have Sumit with us, and this is part two of our session, product owner interview session from EY. And if you are watching it first time, go back and watch our previous part one. And yeah, Sumit, welcome one more time, and let's begin.
Hey, Sunan, thanks.
Okay, so this is eighth question because we have covered 7 questions in our previous session. So this is the eighth one. Okay, so during the product life cycle, how often you should engage a client? That's a question. And if you can describe some process or expected outcome from that engagement, that would be again beneficial, Samit.
Okay. So I'm assuming client here means obviously the person, I mean the eventual customer, or who's obviously sponsoring and paying for your
Correct,
product.
correct, absolutely correct.
Yes, yeah. So it would be mostly in B2B products, and personally, what I talked about in the earlier session was about the different tracks, right? The discovery phase, having the refinement phase. So in the discovery phase, which happens for me, maybe it can be 3 or 4 iterations. It can be even frequently, as every iteration is wherein you have cadence set up with each of these members, and it cannot be not only clients, it can be your salespeople, it can be other external vendors also of your organization. So that is a place where I would say you essentially talk to them. You have already might have rolled out multiple product increments prior to your next meeting, next session with them, and then those themselves have feedback inbuilt in them, right? Because you're doing testing with them, you probably have UATs with these folks, and that is a good way to have input to your product backlog. And that is a good way, good opportunity. So I would say one thing that you want to do is obviously having at a minimum, at least every 3 or 4 iterations having this. Obviously the more the better. And if this is a customer, if it's sort of a B2C product, then essentially you want to be in constant conversations with your customers, gathering feedback, understanding pain points. The more, I can't stress enough how important customer feedback is in a B2C product. And you need to understand not only what their pain points are, but what is the competitive landscape. And many a times your customers themselves are sort of inputs of customer competition. So they would say that on your this X product has this feature, why don't you have this? Can we build this like Y product? So those kinds of discussions you should have as frequently as possible, because you might be not even aware of such competitive offerings or such there might be various improvement areas. So in that case, I would say the more frequent the better. And it's better to have that cadence lined up based on what a product is, whether it is a B2B to B2C. So whatever cadence you're following, whether it is daily meetings with your customers and clients or a weekly, just make sure that you also have a cadence to incorporate them back into your backlog, because you don't want to be picking up features in the stories when it is really important, and then you see it is a burning issue or a burning requirement. You always want to have a healthy backlog, an exhaustive backlog, so that whenever you're adding new things into a backlog, you know what is the relative position of that user story, of that feature, in relation to other things in the backlog. If you don't have a healthy backlog, if you're adding them in the last moment, then probably features at the top, they may seem very important, but actually they are not as important. So having those discussions with the customers and having a feedback mechanism into the backlog is what you essentially want to set up, whatever your cadence is with your customers or clients.
Okay, thanks, Sumit, for that. Okay. And this one is again an interesting one. So in what way do you promote experimentation on your agile team? So we know that there is something called IP sprint in scale agile. You might be obviously doing that. So yeah, what do you, Sumit? How you will promote new ideas, new thoughts in your team?
Yeah, so I would go to the absolute basic itself, right? So when your team is working and you also are working on a user story, what you want to understand is that in a user story, you're only capturing basically the why and the what, right? Why you want that feature. Ideally, you shouldn't have implementation details and actual coding lessons built into it, and how the technical approach should be. That should be left up to the team. So starting at the very basic, at a user story level, that is where the innovation and experimentation comes in. So that should be held or be allowed, and the ownership should be entirely with the team, how they want to approach with it, what they deem is the right approach. So I would say, as a product owner, the first phase is obviously to have user stories, to write user stories in a format which obviously only talks about the why and the what, not the how, and how, I mean, the product should be built. And you talked about, obviously, in scaled agile, you have also, obviously, I mean, spikes, which we would be doing as part of your product. You have sprint zeros also, in terms of when you're designing new features or a new product. So sprint zero is essentially your first phase. It can be more than one sprint also, but essentially your first phase of a product, wherein you want to have all the experimentations, your discoveries, your hypothesis testing. So that is one way wherein you can experiment with the team, having new approaches, ask them to come up with new innovative approaches, look at market approaches. Maybe we can, there might be cases where you want to buy a particular solution versus implementing that solution. So these are not possible when you're actually in the actual thick of things. So it is better to have such dedicated iterations, which are, the sole purpose is to come up with different ideas, or to essentially explore product idea. So that is one approach I personally use so at a iteration level. And at a roadmap level, again, this is a discussion which you need to have with your stakeholders. Personally, and what I've observed in many organizations, is that as part of every roadmap or any initiative, you have a buffer area, or a buffer, sort of a 10%, wherein you are essentially looking at innovation or innovation capabilities that you want to build in the product, right? Because if it's a product which has a lot of competitors and it is a cutthroat market, you want to be investing in features and innovation ideas which help the product. And one good way to make sure that your product is getting that right investment is making sure at your roadmap level itself, you are making provisions for such sprints or iterations, whatever level you want to design your roadmap in. So that is at the absolute roadmap level. And in terms of, we talked about the discovery track. So discovery track is essentially, half part of it is innovation and doing secondary research and understanding what the pain points are, and having them as part of the product backlog. And those are, at the first pass, those are your discovery sprints or your experimentation stories, where your team is experimenting and seeing whether the value hypothesis that you are using when you're building the story is actually worthwhile or not, whether the feasibility and the effort that you would require to build that product is in line or not. So those kinds of things you would be obviously doing at the top of the product. And like we talked of earlier, also in the earlier sessions, you would ideally be involving your product team in such discussions as well, at the absolute top, when you're having innovation ideas, new product features as part of your backlog.
Okay, thanks, Sumit, for that. Okay, this one is again kind of a scenario based. A lot of time it's been asked. So let's assume that your development team is failing repeatedly, sprint after sprint, in order to fulfill their sprint commitment.
Okay.
So as a product owner, what is your take on that? What you can do with respect to that?
Yeah, so I mean, failing on your sprint goals there can be multiple reasons. It can be probably something which probably the Scrum Master needs to look at. So I won't talk about what the Scrum Master needs to do in terms of motivating personnel and having the right sized sprints. It can be a team problem also. So probably your teams are not estimating stories in the right way. You might want to look at your prioritization approach, and also your sizing approach. So one very good, easy, simple way is, if you're using, for example, poker planning to estimate your stories, you want to base your basic user story into which reflects some functionality of a product, which is the easiest to build, which is sort of a unitary part of your product. So if that is one user story, then essentially all other user stories you size in relation to that. So if you don't have such kinds of practices, it is better probably you build that baseline story, and in your prioritizations and your sprint planning sessions, when you're doing the estimations of it, you base it on that basic story. That is one part of it. And in terms of as a product owner, when you writing stories, you might want to break down stories further. That can be a case wherein your stories are probably at a very high level, so they are tougher to estimate because there are lots of unknowns. So in that case, you might want to drill down your stories a bit further into more granular ones, which are easier to estimate. And the obviously the more accurate estimations you have, what you will see is that your team obviously knows what is their velocity after a couple of iterations based on that granular story estimation. And then obviously after that, once they know the velocity, then they know, okay, based on their velocity, this is the estimations that we can do. So there can be multiple reasons. What I would say is obviously look at your sizing approach. Whether you have a good sizing robust mechanism, probably you want to look at the base story that your sizing is based on. And also you might want to size down your stories themselves a bit further, have a more granular approach so that sizing is easier. You might have multiple passes also. So I mean, most teams have a single sprint planning, but what you will see is that sizing themselves also changes when you have more knowns, more unknowns turning into knowns. So you might want to have a sprint planning right before the or sort of a prioritization and sizing just prior to the sprint start, so that you have the absolute clear visibility and all of the information that is required, versus having a sizing which is probably a couple of iterations old and things might have changed since then. Yeah.
Okay, Sumit, I have one follow-up question on that. And this I heard a lot of time from our team, and I don't know how much true. Yeah, it's true. Sometimes it's true. So the question is, sometimes team say that we got lot of pressure from product owner in terms of pushing the requirements, or will you take this, or will you take this also? It's very also important. Sometimes product owner maybe himself is not aware about the prioritization thing, or maybe there are a lot of things, a lot of pressure from his stakeholders, as we have discussed in the past, right? So would you like to throw some light on that also? Because yeah, most of the time people not touch this part, but because you are a product owner and you might have seen maybe from your perspective, because we just see the half perspective from a team perspective. But
Yeah.
what is your take? Like you might have seen something in the past from your experience, Sumit, if you want to share, when you
Yeah,
are
I
also a
mean,
little pushy.
exactly. Yeah. So you're as a product owner, you're always having these trade-off decisions. You always have external forces trying and forcing things which you probably hadn't planned before into your product backlog, into your sprint backlogs. So what I would say is, as a product owner, it is important to know what is again your velocity of the team, and if those requests are really valid and they are time sensitive, you have to implement them. Then as a product owner, you should know which features then or which stories would essentially be deferred to next iterations. I would say it is again the ownership of the team. So if Scrum Guide itself says that the ownership of the product backlog in terms of what needs to be built, what needs to be taken as part of the sprint backlog is the teams. So if the team feels that this is too much, then obviously that is a conversation which the product owner needs to have with the team, and then the product owner can make such decisions as to what needs to be deferred. And from a product owner angle as well, you can't change realities. There's always going to be pressure, and there's going to be forces. As a product owner, you need to be cognizant. We talked about features which probably don't make sense. In such cases, you might want to have discussions with your stakeholders in terms of identifying whether they are the right fit or not. Maybe pick up a small part of it as experimentation rather than the entire feature to make sure that you're building the right feature. So those kinds of things you want to do it. And obviously, if you see that you anyways have to pick this up and your sprint backlog is full and you don't have any velocity capacity remaining, then you obviously have to make those trade-off decisions. And the product owner is the right person to make that decision, because you are the owner of the product backlog. You know what needs to be delivered first, so you make that trade-off decisions that okay, this is something that we can defer to future sprints.
Thanks, Sumit, for that. Okay. So this one is pretty straightforward. I don't know why EY people ask this question. So can a person be a product owner for multiple teams? That's the question, Sumit.
Yeah. No, so the thing is, as a product owner, you're going to manage the entire product backlog of a single product, right? So that means we talked
So one
about that.
product owner, one product backlog. That,
Yes, yes.
yeah, that is one.
Yeah, and essentially by definition also your any team, it should have obviously 6 to 8 members. You have one product owner, you have one scrum master. So per definition, as it is, you ideally shouldn't be having it. Obviously organizational realities can be different. So what I would say is, if those two teams are part of the same product or as part of the same suite, then there can be cases where you're owning probably co-owning the product backlog, wherein both of these two essentially make up the product. But if those are two separate products, they have two separate product visions and backlogs, then that is something which is not advisable, because you are not doing you're doing a disservice basically to the product by not investing the required time and the different cadences that product owner requires.
Totally, that's the ideal word, but yeah,
Yeah.
unfortunately, there are a lot of pressure from the management, and then yeah, you might have also seen that one product owner is serving at least
Yeah.
2 3 different products, and
Yeah.
that's where the challenge came, when people will struggle, your team will struggle, and no one will do the justice to the actual product. So yeah,
Exactly.
sometimes you have to say no. So it's very important. Yeah. Okay,
Exactly.
great. So the next question is, how do you communicate with uncooperative stakeholders? So it's
Yeah.
again a straightforward question. Let's see, Sumit, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's
Yeah,
a broad question. Stakeholders can be
communication is
anything.
always a key. I mean, whether
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
your team or a stakeholder. So I would
correct.
say how you communicate with the stakeholder, how often, and sometimes there are challenges from a stakeholders. They have different view set with respect to your product. Maybe they are not that much helpful. So in that sense, maybe how you cooperate or communicate with those kind of stakeholders.
Exactly. So, and also to further elaborate on your point, so stakeholders themselves can be various types and forms. They can be external to organizations, they can be vendors wherein you don't have direct lines of communication. So there can be lots of approaches and differences in terms of how you tackle stakeholders. So one thing I would say is, obviously it depends on the type of stakeholder that is in question. But some things which has helped me personally, and this is my business analyst's experience talking more than a product owner experience, because you're essentially talking to internal stakeholders and all different kinds of users, is you want to probably establish different means of communication. One thing is, obviously you might be seeing that emails or calls are not working, so you might lead or try different forms of communications, maybe organize meetings with other stakeholders as well. You might obviously have one-on-one chats with them. So that is one way. Probably you want to build a personal relationship also with the stakeholder, so that this person gives you more time that is required. What you also want to do is, you want to see whether there is any person that the decision making capabilities can be delegated to. So are there other people on this members team which have a similar role, which have similar influence? If, especially if this person doesn't have time, or the and is too senior, so you might want to see whether there is somebody junior who can delegate, who has delegation capabilities or delegation authority. That is another thing. And yeah, I mean, basically trying and building that line of communication involves building a personal relationship also. So try and attend different meetings which this person is probably not in your own requirement, but you can participate in other product and business analyst discussions, wherein you essentially have built that rapport with this person. And if anything is not working, personally what I would say is, you talk to your sponsors, to this person's managers, in terms of, not in terms of accusatory tones, but in terms of trying and explaining to them that this is where some decisions are getting blocked, or there are some dependencies on the stakeholders, and this is where we need this person's time. It could be that their calendars are filled, so that is where you need help in terms of prioritizing their obviously work. So yeah, there are different forums, and the higher the person or the higher authority the individual is in your organization, obviously the tougher it would be to get their time. So it would be better that in the interactions and the time that you actually get with them, those are more fruitful, those are to the point, and you are essentially trying and tackling issues which are the most important versus just as a first come first serve basis. So these are some tips I would say. But yeah, I mean, it's a very different thing, and I mean in
So
terms
it
of people
varies.
management, and it changes per stakeholder. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thanks. Okay. And again, this one is again a very common thing which you might have also seen, that whenever you are developing any new product or a feature, you will get lot of suggestions from stakeholders, from member of your organization. So sometimes it's like you will be overwhelmed with their inputs. So how you deal with those kind of suggestions for your new features or products from different various stakeholders?
Yeah, that happens a lot. So we talked about a bit of prioritization and trying to understand whether the product the features is a good product fit. Again, I'll talk about the impact matrix, wherein you for any decision or any product feature, you want to have an idea of what is the impact in terms of contributing to the product vision versus the feasibility. Things which are not very feasible and don't impact your product vision, you essentially don't want to pick them, you drop them. But things which are more important and obviously you feel that those are feasible as well, then that is something which you pick up as part of your backlog. So yeah, so what I would say is that you obviously have that initial first pass. uh, it can be based on your product sense or
Sumit, Sumit, you can hear me?
yeah, you got
I
dropped.
think
What?
we lost you for, yeah, we lost you for a couple
Oh,
of seconds.
okay.
We'll repeat this question again.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So I'm resuming it again.
Mhm.
Okay, I'm hitting it.
Yeah.
No, okay, so Sumit, the next question is about suggestions. So you might have seen that whenever you are creating your product, right, or whenever new features are coming, you might have seen a lot of suggestions from various stakeholders, from members of your organization. So sometimes very difficult to summarize everything. So how you deal with all these suggestions and inputs from various stakeholders, Sumit?
Yeah, I mean, we talked earlier also about the first question you need to ask is whether it's the right product fit, whether it is something which is worth building or not, and something like the impact matrix, trying and understanding whether it has a sizable impact on your vision versus its feasibility is the right one or not. So things which probably are not as feasible, but they still have a good impact, you might want to defer it for future sprints. And in terms of managing and organizing, your product backlog is the best reflection of all of these requests. So product backlog, we very, I mean, mistakenly think of it as being only user stories, but it can mean anything from bugs, it can mean feedback, it can mean essentially all of these requests that we talked about. So your product backlog ideally should be the best mirror of what are the different forces that are essentially trying and shipping a product. You want to detail out stories and such features which are of a high priority. And again, the impact matrix or an impact effort sort of estimation helps you understand, okay, these are the requests which are coming in frequently, meaning this might be a high impact one. So let's detail it out further. The ones which are lower in your backlog may be just a placeholder for now, but in future iterations, you might want to look into it as and when you're burning user stories. So that is the best way to organize it. So having a good requirement repository tool, be it Jira or Team Foundation server or any other tool that you might be using, have that updated with all of these requests. Um, Again, since we talked about the backlog being a mixture of different kinds of artifacts, being from stories to bugs, each of them would have different um, analysis or different kinds of testing also you would want to do. So a bug would obviously be, there would be some sort of triaging, some documentation in terms of how to reproduce this issue. But whereas a feature request or a totally new innovation idea would have a spike attached to it. So there you would have a document which has the spike, the outcomes, expected outcomes, what are the different approaches you're going to do. So that is a good way to track and handle that. Okay, these are the different issues, these are the different approaches that you are going to track for each of the stories, and what is the outcome. Again, the backlog would tell you what is the status, what are the details. A good requirement repository would tell you what are the expected completion dates, what is the follow-up dates, the comments. So those kinds of things is a good way to track it. Emails are good as long as you have track of all the emails, but as soon as you lose track of a thread or you're not part of a thread, you're essentially running back and your backlog is outdated. So yeah, that's a good way to track product backlog.
Okay, thanks for those tips, Sumit. Okay, so the next one is how do you prioritize people when you have two essential features to work on, but you cannot do both at the same time? So how you prioritize in this kind of scenario?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So essentially, what you're asking is what is the right prioritization approach? And here I would say is that it depends again whether these two features are related to each other or they are totally different initiatives or totally different tracks. If they are part of the same sort of feature set or the same product line, in terms of, let's say a mobile app versus a desktop app, these are two different product lines or different themes you might have in your product. But if the feature is the same under the same product line, you would want to look at dependency first. So are the two stories dependent on each other? Obviously the ones which are apparent or one which unblocks the next story, that needs to be picked up earlier. So in such cases, something like a dependency map or a dependency tree helps you understand dependency. It's nothing but like a organizational chart, like a hierarchical diagram, where you essentially talk out as your base parent node feature and what are the different features the dependencies are in. So that's a good way. If they are lying in two different tracks or two different sort of themes, strategic themes, that becomes a bit tricky. So how do you handle security stories versus product features, or let's say we talk about mobile versus desktop? In that case, I would say you need to understand what is your product vision. How do these different features align to your product vision? What is more important, which speaks to your vision more? So if you are, let's say, Amazon, probably having physical stores and having those kinds of things which enables physical stores might be lower in your vision, because Amazon is purely e-commerce. But versus something which is probably having speaks to more what Amazon's visions and what their core values are. So that is a good way in terms of a high level to get a first pass into understanding, okay, this is more important. So prioritization approach, whatever you define, your prioritization scheme ideally should have these factors inbuilt, wherein you're basically uh, undertaking or basically considering what is the vision. There is a mnemonic, a short form which I use. It is BPCR DTSR, which is benefits, penalty, cost, time sensitivity. Then you have risk. So there are various different parameters you want to have your prioritization approach based on. So what you do is, for each and every feature, you define a score. What is the benefit? What is the cost? What is the penalty? Time sensitivity? Those kinds of things for each of them. And that is where you'll have a robust prioritization approach, trying to understand, okay, this is something which is more important versus the other. There is probably a dependency on some other items. There is a time sensitivity in terms of, okay, this is something which customers are asking frequently, which they wanted in the next release or so. So this gets a prioritization. So you need to account for all of these different factors. And if you have such a good prioritization technique, you ideally are prioritizing the right story first. But at the end of the day, I mean, a very rare scenario that both of the features are totally the same in terms of priorities. They talk to the same product goals, they have the same metrics, whatever you've defined, then it becomes a product owner decision. Whatever you decide to differ, you obviously need to talk to the stakeholders, the right customers of this feature, and explain to them why you are probably differing the story, and make sure obviously in the next story or next iteration you are picking that up.
Okay, thanks, Sumit, for that. Okay, so here's the next one. So what product you currently using every day, why, and how you will improve it? Anything which you are using in
Yeah.
your day-to-day life.
Yeah, I mean, as part of obviously work and personal, there are lots of products. One product I think so, which is easy to sort of have a base mark or a benchmark, is Google Documents or Google Docs. So that is something which I use mostly for personal work, sometimes for professional work as well. And I mean, incidentally, also I have to use obviously MS Office and MS Office suite of products, and it becomes easier to compare. So I would say Google Docs, especially Google Sheets, it is a good offering in terms of collaboration and its online collaborating capabilities, and also formulas are pretty robust. So in that sense, it's a very good product. But having that ability of editing documents on the go offline is there, but it's not as robust. Plus, having that experience of a native app, editing very heavy documents or heavy spreadsheets, running formulas, pivots, that is something which you would prefer having a native app. So one feature request I would have with Google Docs is to have a native application which essentially has is essentially tailored to high power users who have lots of data crunching to do, which Excel at least excels in that area, I would say.
Okay, thanks, Sumit, for that. Okay, now you have to think of a company which is providing the excellent customer services. So according to you, what they are doing it differently, and how they are doing it? That's the question, Sumit. So I know
Yeah.
like you have shared about Amazon, but if you have anything else, you can
Yeah.
also. Yeah.
Yeah, Amazon is the perfect example for me, because their vision itself talks about having the best or most customer centric company in the world. So that is a very easy example to relate to, and you can also see in their offerings. In terms of example, their returns and exchanges are, I mean, I think so they have set the industry benchmark for it. So if you have ever tried an exchanging phones, for a new phone, try it on Amazon and try it on Flipkart at both of other time. I mean, most of the times you see the Amazon experience is better. Whenever I exchange phone on Amazon, it has been a free experience, and I mean a very seamless experience in terms of no questions asked. Whereas in the Flipkart experience, they are essentially investigating the phone using a microscope, and then each dent and each crack is a cost center which you need to pay, and only then the phone would get exchanged. I'm not saying Flipkart is bad. Flipkart excels in other areas, but that is something which you can essentially see. I mean, any other product with such a good and seamless exchange policy is pretty rare to see. I mean, talking about Amazon a bit, one thing I think so which really helps, and this talks to product managers, is they have a exercise, or they have internal exercises called as dog fooding. This is not exclusive to Amazon, but what they essentially do is they make sure that the features that they're rolling out to the customers are worthwhile. It's not something like you just roll it out just to see, like a pilot testing, okay, whether it's worthwhile. So what they do is, any feature that they do is, they first see whether the customers within the company, the people working within the organization, they roll it out to them. So then they see whether the products or features, whether the customers within the organization are actually have a positive feedback on that. And only once they passes all of their dog fooding test cases, only then it gets rolled out to customers, and it shows. So that is a very good example. In terms of customer service, I would say most of the big MNC e-commerce, or not e-commerce, the tech giants or product companies which are essentially into electronic equipments like Sony, they have a very good experience in terms of warranty claims, Also, if you walk into a Sony store, you'll always have people there to explain you what are the different product features, and that's a very high-end customer experience. And in terms of apps or things that we use on a mobile, I think so. Things like Spotify and Google Maps. These are two apps which I personally use a lot, and it's very easy to use, and there are very few competitors, I would say, which has a very seamless app experience, not only in features but in accuracy, in terms of both strong recommendation and even obviously location finding. So these are two products which I use daily, which are really good. But yeah, again, for me, in terms of customer experience, purely if you're talking about the North Star, the absolute gold standard would be Amazon for me.
Okay, thanks, Sumit. I think with this we are came to end of our session. So it's a
Right.
wonderful experience. I am telling you, for me as well personally, I have learned a lot of new keywords from this session from you. So thanks for that, Sumit. And I'm sure a lot of people who are going to watch this session, they will definitely learn something new. That's the idea. If they are spending their half an hour or 15 minutes, if they get something new, if they are, it will add some value to their whatever interviews, that will be great. So thanks, Sumit, for your time. I really appreciate you came. I think it's a late night over there in India. So thanks a lot, Sumit, for your time.
No problem. Thanks, Sunan. Appreciate it.
Thank you.